Om Guru Brahma Guru Vishnu Guru Devo Maheshwaraha Guru Sakshat Parabrahma Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. Om Ganana Ganapatigam Mamahe Kavin Kavinam Upavashravasramam Jeshtarajam Brahmanan Brahmanaspada Anushrunnoti Visni Dasadanam. Om Mahagapataye Namaha. Om Keshwaya Namaha. Om Narayana Namaha. Om Madhvaya Namaha. Om Govindaya Namaha, Om Vishnave Namaha, Matsudaya Namaha, Trivikramaya Namaha, Vamanaya Namaha, Sridharaya Namaha, Vrishaya Namaha, Padmanabhaya Namaha, Damodaraya Namaha, Sankarshanaya Namaha, Vasudevaya Namaha, Pradyumnaya Namaha, Aniruddhaya Namaha, Purushottamaya Namaha, Dukshaya Namaha, Jnanasimhaya Namaha, Achyutaya Namaha, Janardana Upendraya Namaha, Hare Namaha, Sri Krishna Namaha, Hari Om, Hari Om. Dear friends, we came to the 34th chapter of Bhagavata Purana, in which we are discussing about saving the life of Nanda Maharaja, Lord Krishna's father, from the python or clutches of the serpent, and Shankachuda will be given moksha. Shankachuda will be slain and be given moksha for him also. So, one day, Nanda Maharaja and the other cowherd men placed their family members on their bullock carts and went to the Ambikavana forest to worship Lord Shiva. After bathing in the Saraswati river and worshipping Lord Sadashiva, a form of Lord Vishnu, they decided to spend the night in the forest. As they slept, a hungry serpent came and began to swallow Nanda Maharaja. And Nanda Maharaja is terrified. He cried out in distress, "O Krishna, O my son, please save this surrendered soul." The coward men immediately awoke and began beating the serpent with wooden torches. But the serpent would not release Nanda. Then Lord Krishna came and touched the serpent with his lotus feet. The serpent was immediately freed from his reptilian body and appeared in his original form as a god. He told them about his previous identity and described how he had been cursed by a group of sages. Then he offered his homage at the lotus feet of Lord Sri Krishna. On the Lord's order, returned to his own abode. Later, during the Dola Purnima festival, Krishna and Balarama enjoyed pastimes in the forest with the young woman of Vraja. The girlfriends of Balarama and those of Krishna joined together and sang about their transcendental qualities. When the two lords became absorbed in singing the point of apparent intoxication, a servant of Kuberas named Shankachuda boldly came forward and began abducting the gopis. The young girls called out for help, "Krishna, Krishna, please save us." And he and Balarama began to chase after Shankachuda, and the Shankachuda got afraid of Krishna chasing him. Krishna called out to the gopis. In fear of the Lord, Shankachuda left the gopis aside and ran for his life. Krishna chased him after him, swiftly approached him, and with a blow of his fist removed Shankachuda's jewel together with his head. Then Krishna brought the jewel back and presented to Lord Balarama. This is the summary of this chapter. So the chapter now starts with the Sloka. Suka Maharshi is telling the Sloka first of the 34th chapter. Sri Suka Vacha. Ekada Deva Yatrayam Gopala Chata Kautukaha Anobirad Nudyakte Prayaste Ambikavanam. So they are traveling to Ambikavanam. Suka Maharshi said to Parikshit Raja, one day the cowherd men, eager to take a trip to worship Lord Shiva in Ambikavana, a forest called Ambika forest, and they traveled in the bullock cart. According to Srila Jiva Goswami, the word Ekada here indicates the occasion of Shivaratri. He further mentioned that Ambikavana is in Gujarat province near the city of Siddhapura. Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti Thakura adds that the departure of the cowherd men specifically took place on the 14th lunar day of the dark fortnight of the month of Palguna. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti also quotes authorities who claim that Ambikavana lies on the bank of the Saraswati River, northwest of Mathura. Ambikavana is notable because within it are deities of Lord Shiva and his wife, goddess Uma or Ambika. Tatra snatra saraswatyam devam pashupatim vibhum anurcharayanir devim chandrapate ambikam. O king, after arriving there, they bathed in the Saraswati river and then devotedly worshipped with various paraphernalia the powerful Lord Pashupati and his consort goddess Ambika. The cowherd men gave the Brahmanas gifts of cows, gold, clothing, and cooked grains mixed with honey. Then the cowards prayed, "May the Lord be pleased with us." Nanda Maharaja and Sunanda and the other greatly fortunate cowards spent the night on the bank of the Saraswati river, strictly observing their oaths. They fasted, taking only water. They worshipped Shiva, and the whole day and night they fast. After the fast, by taking only water, that's all. Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti explains that Sunanda is the younger brother of Nanda Maharaja. So Nanda Maharaja came with his brother called Sunanda, and the other greatly fortunate cowards spent the whole night in the bank of Saraswati river. During that night, a huge and extremely hungry snake appeared in that area. Slithering on his belly up to the sleeping Nanda Maharaja, the snake began swallowing Nanda Maharaja. The Sloka 6, Sachakrosha hinagrastaha Krishna Krishna Mahanayam Sarpo ma grisate tata prapanna parimochayaha. In the clutches of the snake, Nanda Maharaja cried out, "Krishna, Krishna, my dear boy, help me. The huge serpent is swallowing me. Please save me, who am surrendered to you." When the cowherd men heard the cries of Nanda Maharaj, they immediately rose up and saw that he was being swallowed by a snake. Distraught, they beat the serpent with blazing torches. But even though the fire brands were burning him, the serpent would not release Nanda Maharaja. Then the Supreme Lord Krishna, master of his devotees, came to the spot and touched the snake with his foot. Savai Bhagavataha Srimat Pada Darshana Hutashabaha Beje Sarpa Varpita Sarpa Uparhita Tvarupam Vidyadhara Architam. The snake had all his sinful reactions destroyed by the touch of the Supreme Lord Krishna's divine foot. Lotus feet of Lord Krishna touched the snake, and thus he gave up his serpent body and appeared in the form of a worshipable Vidyadhara. The words Rupam Vidyadharetim indicate that erstwhile snake appeared in a beautiful form of worshipable among the gods called Vidyadhara. In other words, he appeared as the leader of Vidyadharas. The Supreme Lord Rishikesha then questioned this personality, who was standing before him with his head bowed, his brilliantly effulgent body bedecked with golden necklaces. The god was about to speak, and Lord Krishna wanted to focus everyone's attention on his words. Therefore, he personally inquired from the worshipable Vidyadhara, who was standing before him with his head bowed. Sarpa uvacha, the snake is telling now, Aham Vidyadharaha kaschit sudarshana iti vritaha Sri Asurupa Sampatva Vimanina Charam Disha. Lord Krishna said, "My dear, you appear so wonderful, glowing with such great beauty. Who are you?" and who forced you to assume this terrible body of a snake? Now the snake uvacha. Sarpa uvacha aham vidyadara kaschis sudarshan iti shrutaha sri asrupa sampatva vimane acharam dishaha. ऋषीन्विरूपानङ्गिरसः प्राह संरूपदर्पितः त्वरिमां प्रापितो योनिं प्रलब्धे स्वेनापाप्सुनः. So Sarpa is telling, the snake is telling, the serpent replied to Krishna, I am the well-known Vidyadhara named Sudarshana. I was very opulent and beautiful, and I used to wander freely in all directions in my plane. Once I saw some homely sages of this lineage of Angirasa Muni. Proud of my beauty, I ridiculed them, and because of my sin, they made me assume this lovely form of a snake. Shapo menu grahayumai kateste karunatmibihi yadaham loka guruna padas prishto hata shubhaha. It was actually for my benefit that those merciful sages cursed me. Since now I have been touched by the foot of the supreme spiritual master of all the worlds and have thus been relieved of all inauspiciousness and all the sins are clear. Tam twaham bhavabhitanam prapannanam bhayapaham aprachesha panirmuktaha padasparshadamivanan. So snake is telling, once you touched, my Lord, you destroy all fear of those who fearing this material world. Take shelter of me. Take shelter of you. My Lord, you destroy all the fear of those who fearing this material world. Take shelter of you. By the touch of your feet, I am now freed from the curse of the sages. O destroyer of the distress, please let me return to my planet. According to the Acharyas, the word aprachai indicates that Sudarshana humbly requested the Lord Krishna for permission to return to his abode, where he might take up his duties again, certainly in chastened state of mind. Prapannosmi mahayogin mahapurushatpate anujanahi man deva sarvalokeshwareshwaraha. O my master of mystic power, O great personality, O Lord of the devotees, I surrender to you. Please command me as you will. O Supreme Lord, Lord of all the Lords of the universe, please allow me to go to my abode. Text 17. Brahmadandvat vimuktoham sadaste chuta darshanat yannama grihanan lakiran shrotnatmanamevacha sadhya punati kim bhuyasvasya spashtam padahite. O infallible one, I was immediately freed from the Brahmanas' punishment simply by seeing you. Anyone who chants your name purifies all who hear his chanting, as well as himself. How much more beneficial then is the touch of the lotus feet? Ityanujñapya dasharham parikramyabhivandyacha sudarshano divam yataha kruchvan nandascha mochitaha. Thus receiving the permission of Lord Krishna, the god Sudarshana circumambulated Lord Krishna, bowed down to offer him homage, and then returned to his heavenly planet. Nanda Maharaja was thus delivered from peril of snakes swallowing him. Nishamya Krishnasya tadatma vaibhavam rajaukaso vismitchetastasastataha samapyatasmin niyamam punarvrajam naipayu statyatayantadrutaha. The inhabitants of Vraja, bhumi, were astonished to see the mighty power of Sri Krishna, their king. Then then completed their worship of Lord Shiva and returned to Vraja bhumi, along the way respectively describing Krishna's powerful acts. Kadachidate Kadachidata Govindo Ramaschadbhavitvrukamaha Vijabhruturvane Ratra Madhyagho Vrajayoshitam. Once Lord Govinda and Lord Balarama, the performers of wonderful feats, were playing in the forest at night with the young girls of Vraja. This verse introduces a new pastime. According to Acharya, the occasion mentioned here is Holika Purnima, a day also known as Gaura Purnima. According to the Acharyas, the occasion mentioned here is the Holika Purnima, a day also known as Gaura Purnima. Upagiyamano lalitam strijanairbadda sauhrdai swalankritanuliptanga sogrinav virajombaro. Krishna and Balarama wore flower garlands and spotless garments. Lord Krishna and Balarama wore flower garlands and spotless garments, and their limbs were beautifully decorated and anointed. The women sang their glories in a charming way, bound to them by affection. The two lords, Lord Krishna and Lord Balarama, praised the nightfall, signaled by rising the moon and the appearance of stars, lotus-scented breeze, and bees intoxicated by the fragrance and jasmine flowers. Jagatu sarva bhushanam, Jagatu sarva bhutanam, manashravana mangalam, tau kalpayanto yugapat swaramandala murchitam. Krishna and Balarama sang, producing the entire range of musical sounds simultaneously. Their singing brought happiness to the ears and minds of all the living beings. Text number 24th Shloka. Gopyastad Geetama Karanya Murchitanamidan Rupa Stam Srad Kulamatmanam Swastra Keshastrajam Tataha Statra Keshastrajam Tataha. The gopis became stunned when they heard that song. Forgetting themselves, O king, they did not notice that their fine garments were becoming loose and their hairs and garments disheveled. Evam vikridito ho swairam gayato sampramattamat Shankachuda iti kyato dhanadhana charo bhragat. While Lord Krishna and Lord Balarama thus played according to their own sweet will and sang to the point of apparent intoxication, servant of Kubera named Shankachuda came upon the scene. O king, even as the two lords looked on, Shankachuda brazenly began driving the woman off toward the north. The women who had accepted Krishna and Balarama as their lords began to cry out to them. According to Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti, the demon Shankachuda shook a large stick at the beautiful young girls, thus frightening them and driving them towards the north. He did not actually touch them, as is corroborated by the following verse. Kroshantam Krishna Rameti Vilokya Swaparigraham Yathaga Dusyuna Grasta Bhrata Ramanvadhavatam. Hearing their devotees crying out Krishna Rama and seeing that they are just like cows being stolen by a thief, Krishna and Balaram began to run after the demon. माबेष्टत्य भयारावो शालहस्तौ तरस्मिनौ असेदतुस्तं तरसा त्वरितं गुह्यकादमम्. The lords called out in reply, "Do not fear." Then they picked up logs of the chara tree and quickly pursued that lowest Gukyakas, who swiftly ran away. Shloka number 29. Savikshatavan prapto kalo mrutyo ivodvijan visrujya sri janam mudaha pradram vajjivate chaya. When Shankachuda saw the two of them coming toward him like the personified forces of time and death, he was filled with anxiety and worries. Confused, he abandoned the woman and fled for his life. Tamanmadavid Govindo yatra yatra sadhavati Jayishnustuchirotnam tasmo rakshan striyo balaha. Lord Govinda chased the demon wherever he ran, eager to take his crest, jewel. Meanwhile, Lord Balarama stayed with the woman to protect them. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti explained that the women were fatigued from the being driven away, and thus Lord Balarama protected them and consoled them as they rested. Meanwhile, Lord Krishna went off to the demon. The mighty Lord Krishna overtook Shankachuda from a great distance, as if from nearby, "My dear king," and then with his fist, the Lord removed the wicked demon's head together with his crest jewel. Shankachudam nihatyeva manimadaya bhaswaram. Shankachudam nihatyevam manimadaya bhaswaram agrajaya dadata pitya paschantinam shochayoshtitam. Having thus killed the demon Shankachuda and taken away his shining jewel on the head, Lord Krishna gave it to his elder brother Balarama with a great satisfaction as the gopis watched and gopis rescued. Various gopis perhaps thought the Govinda would give one of them the valuable jewel. To prevent rivalry among them, Krishna happily gave the jewel to his older brother Balarama. Thus end the purports of the humble servants. Iti Srimad Bhagavate Mahapurane Paramhamsyam Samhitayam Dashamaskande Purvarde 34th chapter of called Shankachuda Vado Nama Chitistrimshodhyayaha Sampurnam. 35th chapter we are reaching now. We are going to read 36th chapter. Gopis sing of Krishna as he wanders in the forest. This chapter contains the songs of the gopis sing to express their feelings of separation from Krishna when he goes to the forest during the day. As the gopis' mood separation from Sri Krishna becomes ever more intense, his names, forms, qualities, and pastimes begin spontaneously manifesting in their hearts. Thus they join together and sing as follows. The beauty of Krishna attracts the beauty of Lord Krishna attracts the minds of all. When he stands in his threefold bending away and plays upon his flute, the Siddhas' wives flying in the sky with their husbands become attracted to him and forget external reality. The bulls, cows, and other animals in the pasture became stunned in ecstasy, and they stand too still, which the grass unchewed between their teeth, that they appear like figures in a drawing. Indeed, even the bulls, cows, and other animals in the pasture became stunned in ecstasy, and they stand so still with the grass unchewed between their teeth that they appear like figures in a drawing. Indeed, even an unconscious rivers stop flowing, just to see when Krishna dresses himself in the forest array and calls the cows' names by blowing on his flute. Even the trees and creepers become so ecstatic out of love that their limbs display eruptions and their sap pours down like a torrent of tears. The sound of Krishna's flute causes the cranes, swans, and other birds in the lakes to close their eyes in deep meditation. So the clouds in the sky to gentle rumble, imitating the flute's vibration, and even such great authorities in the science of music as Indra, Shiva, and Brahma to become astonished. And just as we gopis are anxious to offer everything we have to Krishna, so the wives of the black deer follow him about imitating us. When Krishna returned to Vraja bhumi, he constantly plays his flute while his young companions chant his glories, and Brahma and other chief demigods came to worship his lotus feet. When Lord Krishna is returning to Vrajabhumi, he constantly plays his flute while his young companions chant his glories, and Brahma and other chief gods come to worship his lotus feet. Thus, the gopis, feeling intense separation from Krishna, sing of his pastimes. Suka uvacha gopyam gopyaha krishnevanam yate tamunadruche tadrutachetasah krishnalilaha pragayanto ninyurdukkena vasaran. Shuka Maharshi is telling to Parikshit Raja, whenever Krishna went to the forest, the minds of the gopis would run after him, and thus the young girls sadly spent their days singing his pastimes. The gopis said, when Mukunda vibrates the flute, he was placed to his lips, stopping its holes with his tender fingers. He rests his left cheek on his right arm. He rests his left cheek on his left arm and makes his eyebrows dance. At that time, the goddesses traveling in the sky with their husbands and the soldiers became amazed. As those ladies listen, they are embarrassed to find their minds yielding to their plant. Srila Jiva Goswami states that this chapter consists of a collection of statements of gopis made at various times as they stood in small groups here and there in Vrindavana. Krishna, O girls, this son of Nanda, who gives joy to the distressed, bears steady lightning on his chest and has a smile like a jeweled necklace. Now, please hear something wonderful. When he vibrates his flute, Vrajabhumi's bulls, deer, cows standing in groups at a great distance are all captivated by the sound of the flute, and they stop chewing the food in their mouths and clock their ears. Stunned, they appear as if asleep or like figures in a painting. The word Shriti Vidyat, steady lightning, refers to the goddess of fortune who resides on the chest of the Supreme Lord Krishna. When the animals of Vrindavana hear the sound of the flute, they become stunned in ecstasy, and thus they stop chewing their food and cannot swallow it. The gopis, in separation from Krishna, marvel at the extraordinary effect of the Lord's flute playing. Srila Sridhara Swami gives the following explanation of the compound word harahasa, which compares Lord Krishna's smile to a necklace. The word can mean he whose smile is brilliantly clear, like a jeweled necklace, or he whose smile is reflected from his jeweled necklace. because while Krishna plays the flute, he bends his head down and smiles. The word can also mean he was just he whose smile, like a jewel necklace, cast its effulgency upon the highest, or he whose necklace are shown brilliantly. My dear gopis, sometimes Mukunda imitates the appearance of a wrestler by decorating himself with leaves, peacock feathers, and colored minerals. Then, in the company of Balarama and the cowherd boys, he plays his flute to call all the cows. At that time, the rivers stop flowing, their water stunned by the ecstasy. They feel as they eagerly wait for the wind to bring them the dust of his lotus feet. But like us, the rivers are not very pious, and thus they merely wait with their arms trembling out of the love. The gopis state here that the sound of Krishna's flute causes even inanimate objects like rivers to become conscious and then stunned in ecstasy. Just as the gopis could not Just as the gopis could not always be in Krishna's physical association, the rivers could not come to the Lord's sweetest foot also. Although they desired the Lord, their movement was checked by ecstasy, and their arms, their wives trembled with the love of Godhead. The gopis' arms and the waves of the rivers trembled with love of Godhead. Krishna moves about the forest in the company of his friends who vividly chant the glories of his magnificent deeds. He thus appears just like the Supreme Personality of Godhead, exhibiting his inexhaustible opulences. When the cows wander onto the mountain sides and Krishna calls out to them with the sound of his flute, the trees and creepers and the forest respond by becoming so luxuriant with fruits and flowers that they seem to be manifesting Lord Vishnu within their hearts. As their branches bend low with the weight, the filaments on their trunk and vines stand erect. Maddened by the divine honey-like aroma of the tulasi flowers on the garland Krishna wears, swarms of bees sing loudly for him, and that most beautiful of all persons thankfully acknowledges and acclaims their song by taking his flute to his lips and playing it nicely. The charming flute song then steals away the minds of the cranes, swans, and other lake dwelling birds. Indeed, they approach Lord Krishna, who close their eyes and maintaining a strict silence, worship him by fixing their consciousness upon him in deep meditation. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has made several illuminating comments on these verses. He gives analogy that just as when householder Vaishnavas hear a Sankirtana party, approaching them become ecstatic and offer obeisances, so the trees and creepers in Vrindavan became ecstatic when they heard Lord Krishna's flute and bowed low with their branches and vines. The word Darshanya Tilaka in the text 10 indicates not only that the Lord is the most excellent to see, but also that he decorated himself with attractive reddish tilaka taken from the mineral mixture, rich earth of Vrindavana forest. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti last points. Srila Chakravarti quotes from the Bhagavatam to that effect. The most fragrant plants in Vaikuntha also appreciate the special qualification of Tulsi Devi. The word Sandita Venu in text 10 indicates that Lord Krishna placed his flute firmly upon his lips, and the melody and chanting from that flute is certainly the most enchanting of the sounds, as the gopis described in this chapter. O goddess of Vraja, when Krishna is enjoying himself with Balarama on the mountain slopes, playfully wearing a flower garland on the top of his head, he, he, engladens, he engladdens all with resonant vibrations of his flute. Thus, he delights the entire world. At that time, the nearly cloud, afraid of offending a great personality, thunders very gently accompaniment. The cloud shows flowers onto his dear friend. At that time, the nearby cloud, afraid of offending a great personality, thunders very gently in accompaniment. The cloud showers flowers onto his dear Lord Krishna, shades him from the sun like an umbrella. O pious mother Yashoda, your son, who is expert in all the arts of herding the cows, has invented many new styles of flute playing when he takes his flute to his bimba, red lip, and sends forth the tones of the harmonic scale of the variegated melodies, Brahma, Shiva, Indra, and other chief gods become confused upon hearing the sound. Although they are the most learned authorities, they cannot ascertain the essence of that music, and thus they bow down their heads and hearts. The words Tva Sucha Sati, your son, O chastity lady, clearly indicate that at this point another Ashoda is among the young gopis as they earnestly describe Lord Krishna's glories. According to Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti, among the demigods led by Shukra, we can say they pray the gods Shukra, Lord Indra, Lord Krishna's glories. According to Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti, among the gods led by Sakra, Lord Indra, were Upendra, Agni, Yamaraja. Among those led by Sarva, Lord Shiva, were Katyayani, Skanda, Ganesha. And among those led by Paramesti, Lord Brahma, were the four Kumaras and the son Narada. Thus, the best collective intelligence in the universe could not definitely analyze the encircling musical arrangements of the Supreme Lord. We came to the 16th and 17th shlokas. Nijapadabda dalayabda bravaja nirajankusha vichitra lalalhamai vrajabhuvaha samayan karatodam vaishna durya gati reditavenu. As Krishna strolls through the Vrajabhumi with his lotus petal-like feet, marking the ground with the distinctive emblems of flag, thunderbolt, lotus, and elephant god. He relieves the distress the ground feels like from the cow's hooves. As he plays his renowned flute, his body moves with the grace of an elephant. Thus, we gopis, who became agitated by Cupid when Krishna playfully glances at us, stand as still as trees, unaware that our hair and garments are slackening. Here, Mother Yashoda is no longer in the company of the gopis, who are confidently describing their conjugal attraction to Lord Sri Krishna. It is clear from the comments of Jiva Goswami and other acharyas that the statements in this chapter were made at various times and places. This is natural since the gopis were always absorbed in thoughts of Sri Krishna and day and night. So the Shloka 18th, Manidaraha Kvachida Ganayan Gamalaya Daitaganda Tulasya Pranayino Nucharasya Kadamse Prakshipan Bujamaga Yatatraha Kshanitave Kshanitavenu Rava Vanchinta Chitta Krishna Manvasata Krishna Grahinyaha Guna Gunarna Managatya Harinyo Gopika Iva Vimukta Grata. Now Krishna is standing somewhere counting his cows on a string of gems. He wears a garland of tulsi flowers that bear the fragrance of his beloved, and he has thrown his arm over the shoulder of an affectionate covered boyfriend. As Krishna plays his flute and sings, the music attracts the black deer's wives who approach that ocean of transcendental qualities and sit down beside him. Just like us covered girls, they have given up all hope of happiness in the family life. Srila Jiva Goswami explains that in the afternoon, Sri Krishna dressed himself in a new clothing and then went out to call the cows home. Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti gives the following information about the transcendental cows of Vrindavana. For each of the four colors of cows, white, red, black, and yellow, there are 25 subdivisions, making a total of 100 colors, and such qualities as being the color like a sandalwood pulp, tilaka, or having a herd shaped like a mridanga drum, create eight further groups. To count these 108 groups of cows, distinguished by color and form, Krishna is using string of 108 jewel beads. Thus, when Krishna calls out, Hey Davali, the name of white cow, a whole group of white cows come forward. And when he calls Hamsi, Chandani, Ganga, Mukta, and so on, the 24 other cow groups of white cows come. The reddish Hamsi, he calls Hamsi, Chandani, Ganga, Mukta, and so on, so many cows. The 24 other groups of white cows come. The reddish cows are called Aruni, Kunkuma, Saraswati, etc. The blackish ones are called Shamala, Dhumala, Yamuna, etc. And the yellowish ones, Pita Pingala, Hartik, Haritalika, etc. Those in the group with Tilaka marks on their foreheads are called Chitrarata, Chitrita. Chitra Tilaka, Dhrugo Tilaka, and Triyak Tilaka. And there are groups known as Mridanga Mukta, Mridanga Mukhi, Mridanga head, Simha Mukhi, lion head, and so on. Thus being called by name, cows are coming forward, and Krishna thinking that when it is time to bring them back home, back from the forest, none should be forgotten, is counting them on his jewel decks. O sinless Yashoda, your darling child, the son of Maharaja Nanda, has festively enhanced his attire with a jasmine garland, and he is now playing along the Yamuna. Now he is playing along with the Yamuna in the company of the cows and covered boys, amusing his dear companions. The gentle breeze honors him when it is soothing fragrance of sandalwood, while the various Upadevas standing in the gentle breeze honors them with its soothing fragrance of sandalwood, while the various Upadevas standing on all sides like Pinjirias offer their music, singing, and gift of tribute. Srila Jiva Goswami explains that the gopis are again in the courtyard of Mother Ashoda, the queen of Rajabhumi. They are trying to encourage her by describing Krishna's return to Vrindavana after he has spent the day herding cows and playing. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur comments that the Upadevas, the minor demigods mentioned here, include the Gandharvas, who are famous for their celestial music and dancing. उत्सवं श्रमजारूपी दृशीनां मनयन् करयतत्वतो व्युत्सयति समुदाशिषवेषा देवकी जगदपूरणिराजः. Out of great affection for the cows of Rajabhumi, Lord Krishna became the lifter of Govardhana hill. At the end of the day, having rounded up all his own cows, he plays a song on his flute, while exalted gods standing along with the path of worship, his lotus feet, and the covered boys accompanying him chant his glories. His garland is powdered by the dust raised by the cows' hooves, and his beauty, enhanced by his fatigue, creates an ecstatic festival for everyone's eyes. Eager to fulfill his friend's desires, Krishna is the moon arisen from the womb of another. According to the Acharyas, at this point the gopis climbed into the watchtowers of Vrindavan houses, and so they could see Krishna as soon as possible when he returned home. Mother Yashoda was very anxious for her son to come back, and therefore she had the tallest of the beautiful young gopis climb. Mother Yashoda was very anxious for her son to come back, and therefore she had the tallest of the beautiful young gopis climb up to see when he would arrive. It is implied here that Krishna was somewhat delayed on the way home because of his lotus feet were being worshipped by great demigods along the path. As Krishna respectfully greets his well-wishing friends, his eyes roll slightly as if from intoxication. He wears a flower garland. Beauty of his soft cheeks is accentuated by the brilliance of his golden earrings and the whiteness of his face, which was the color of a Barbara. The word gavam is constructed from the Sanskrit word go, which means cow and senses. Thus, Sri Krishna, by becoming back to the village of Rajabhumi, relieved the inhabitants of Vrindavana from the distress their minds, eyes, and other senses felt during the day because of being separated from the bhumi, from the direct contact. Sri Shukadeva Goswami said, O king, thus during the daytime of women of Vrindavana took pleasure in continuously singing about the pastimes of Krishna, and those ladies' minds and hearts absorbed in him were this verse definitely confirms that the so-called pain of the heartbroken gopis is actually great spiritual bliss. On the material platform, pain is pain, period. But on the spiritual platform, the so-called pain is simply a different variety of spiritual ecstasy. In the Western countries, people take pleasure in mixing different flavors of ice cream to produce wonderful combinations flavor. Similarly, on the spiritual platform, and his associates Sri Krishna and his devotees expertly mix the flavors of spiritual bliss. The last verse definitely confirms that so-called upon the heartbroken gopis is actually great spiritual bliss. On the material platform, pain is pain, but on the spiritual platform, the so-called pain is simply a different variety of spiritual ecstasy. In the Western countries, people take pleasure in mixing different flavors of ice cream to produce a wonderful combination of flavor. Similarly, on the spiritual platform, Lord Sri Krishna and his devotees expertly mix the flavors of spiritual bliss, and thus every day was a treat for yogis. Thus end the purports. इति श्रीमद्महाभागवते पुराणे पारमहंस्यां संहितायां दशमस्कन्धे पूर्वार्धे वृन्दावन क्रीडायां गोपिका युगलगीतं नाम 35 So we finished 2 chapters today.